Before millions of viewers, Barron Trump said the words that shocked a nation. Go back to Africa. He made one mistake, and Jasmine Crockett turned it into his biggest downfall. Her words shook Washington to its core. How did one voice bring the Trump legacy crashing down? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. Blinding white lights flooded the U.S. Capitol hearing room. Cameras flashed nonstop. Reporters fought for angles, and the air felt like it might explode. Millions were watching live, the nation frozen on one question. Who would break first, Jasmine Crockett or Barron Trump? Jasmine sat straight, calm but fierce, her brown eyes burning through the chaos. Once a civil rights attorney, now the voice of justice itself, she was known for words that cut like steel. Every gesture, every breath radiated control. Across the table, Barron Trump leaned back, arms crossed, a smirk daring anyone to challenge him. He wasn't just another witness. He was the heir of a dynasty that thought it owned America. The topic was clear: racial equality in politics and the moral duty of new leaders. But everyone in the room knew this wasn't just debate. It was war in daylight, lived for the world to see. Then Jasmine Crockett leaned into her microphone, her voice cutting clean through the noise. America is not the private property of any dynasty. This land belongs to all of us. The words struck like thunder. Every syllable carried history. Every breath echoed the weight of generations who had fought to be heard. Cameras zoomed in on her face. Calm, fierce, unflinching. Across the table, Barron Trump froze for half a second. The corners of his mouth twitched, his jaw clenched, and a crimson flush crept up his neck. His hand gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. Then with a flash of arrogance and fury, he snapped, "You don't belong here. Go back to Africa." The words cut through the air like a gunshot. For a moment, even the hum of the lights seemed to vanish. The chamber fell into absolute silence. Dozens of microphones caught every vibration of his voice. The cameras were still rolling, broadcasting live to a nation that had just stopped breathing. Staffers exchanged stunned looks. Senators froze in disbelief. Every viewer across America had just witnessed the impossible. The heir of a former president uttering the sentence no one dared to say aloud. A spark had ignited a wildfire. Then came the uproar. Reporters jumped from their seats, phones shot into the air, flashes exploded like lightning. The committee room erupted in chaos, some shouting, some gasping, some trying to restore order. But at the center of it all, Jasmine remained motionless. Her composure was terrifying. Slowly she stood. The silence returned, heavy and expectant. Her gaze locked on Barron's, sharp enough to slice through the noise. When she spoke, her tone was calm, but her words carried the force of judgment. "You didn't just insult me," she said, eyes never blinking. "You insulted the entire history of this nation." Her voice rang across the marble walls, steady and powerful, as if she were speaking not just to him, but to every American watching. Barron looked away, his smirk gone, his hands trembling slightly. Jasmine stepped forward, her hands resting on the stack of documents before her. "Let's talk about the history you just spat on," she continued. "Let's talk about Martin Luther King Jr., who dreamed of an America where children weren't judged by the color of their skin. Let's talk about Rosa Parks, who refused to give up her seat so the rest of us could stand tall today. Those weren't just names. They were the foundation of the freedom you take for granted." The audience was silent again, but this time in awe. The rhythm of her speech hit like a drumbeat, steady, unrelenting, righteous. "You said, go back to Africa? Then hear me clearly," she said, leaning closer to the mic. "I am Africa. I am America. I am the living proof that both histories flow in the same bloodline, the same soil that built the country you're sitting in." The words burned into the air, irreversible, unforgettable. Every camera focused on her now. The power had shifted. Barron's outburst, that single reckless sentence, had transformed into evidence, immortalized by every recording device in the room. What he thought was dominance had just become his downfall. Jasmine straightened, eyes cold, her final words in that moment sealing the tone for what would follow. "This isn't a debate anymore," she said softly, almost like a verdict. "This is the beginning of a record. The kind history will never erase. The chamber remained frozen, trapped between shock and revelation. Somewhere a pen dropped, the only sound breaking the silence. Outside, headlines were already forming, phones lighting up, social media erupting. Inside, Jasmine Crockett stood still under the blinding white lights, her presence larger than the room itself. That was the moment the hearing changed forever. The first spark of what history would later call the trial of America's conscience. The chamber was still echoing from Jasmine's words when Barron leaned toward the mic, his voice tight but forced into a laugh. "That comment? It was just a joke," he said, his tone dripping with false charm. "People are too sensitive these days, especially her." A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. The attempt to diffuse had the opposite effect. Cameras zoomed in, catching the flicker of arrogance in his eyes. He straightened his tie, smirking as if he still owned the moment. "Let's be honest," Barron continued, his voice louder now. "American history doesn't belong to everyone. It belongs to those who built it. And my family did just that." The words landed like grenades. A few gasps escaped. Several black lawmakers rose from their seats in protest. The tension turned physical. Reporters stood up. The chairman slammed his gavel, demanding order. Jasmine stayed silent, her face unreadable. Calmly, she picked up her pen and began writing, noting every word, every timestamp. Her expression said what her voice did not. This was evidence. Within minutes, headlines exploded. Barron Trump denies racism, claims family built America. He hadn't cleaned the fire. He'd poured gasoline on it, turning himself into his own accuser. The echo of Barron's arrogance still lingered in the air when Jasmine finally moved. Slowly, deliberately, she rose from her chair. The movement alone silenced the room. Every camera shifted toward her, every eye fixed on the calm precision in her hands. She reached into the stack of documents before her and pulled out a thin, worn folder stamped with the seal of the United States Supreme Court. The faint sound of paper sliding against wood carried across the entire chamber. She stepped toward the microphone, holding up the document for everyone to see. Her voice was steady, firm, and cold as steel. "This," she said, "is Brown versus Board of Education, 1954. The Supreme Court ruled 70 years ago that racial segregation in schools is unconstitutional. The court said, and I quote, that separation on the basis of race is inherently unequal." Her words hung in the air like the crack of a gavel. "So when I hear that kind of language in this room today," she continued, eyes locked on Barron, "I hear a direct insult to the law that defines what it means to be American." The room froze. No one dared to move. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to fade. Jasmine placed the folder on the table in front of her, fingers resting lightly on its edge. "The Supreme Court already decided that America has no room for racial superiority," she said, her tone lower now, almost like a warning. "And yet here we are, inside the very institution sworn to uphold that principle, hearing the same poison our ancestors fought to destroy." A murmur spread through the audience, slow and rising. One senator stood, then another. Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then swelling into a wave that filled the chamber. The chairman's gavel struck the desk repeatedly, but even he could not quiet it. Jasmine didn't smile. She just stood there, motionless, letting the sound of approval wash over the words that had already rewritten the moment. She had turned Barron's outburst into a constitutional reckoning, live, unfiltered, and unforgettable. Barron sat frozen, his jaw tight, his palms flat against the desk. The confidence was gone. All that remained was the glare of someone realizing he'd been cornered. He tried to recover, forcing out a brittle laugh that echoed awkwardly. "That was the past," he said sharply. "Times are different now. Things have changed." He was speaking more to himself than anyone else, his words brittle, defensive. Jasmine turned her head slowly toward him. Her expression didn't change, but the silence that followed was lethal. When she spoke, her voice was calm, almost soft, but it cut through the room like a blade. "The past," she said, "is not gone. The past is the verdict of the present." Her words landed like a hammer. For a moment there was no sound, no whispers, no movement, just the heavy pulse of consequence filling the air. Reporters scribbled furiously, camera shutters snapped in rapid bursts, and Barron's face was projected across every news feed in America. Jasmine lowered the folder, her eyes never leaving him. She had done what no one expected. She transformed an insult into an indictment, a moment of humiliation into history itself. The applause that followed wasn't just approval, it was recognition. That a single voice, armed with the truth of law and the memory of justice, had just restored the meaning of the Constitution before a watching nation. And in that silence after the storm, the line between past and present vanished, leaving only Jasmine Crockett standing tall under the white lights. The Constitution itself reflected in her voice. The applause ebbed. Barron reached for a lifeline. He leaned forward, breath sharp, trying to seize control of the narrative. His voice went firm, almost casual, as he clicked the mic. "Freedom of speech lets me say anything," he declared, hammering each syllable. The line hung in the bright air like a legal shield raised in panic. Murmurs scattered across the gallery. Cameras tightened until his pupils filled the frame. Jasmine rose without hurry, the kind of calm that rewrites a room. "Freedom of speech does not protect hate speech," she answered, steady and clear. She lifted a printed slide. Pew Research Center 2023, a black bar above a simple number. 72% of Americans oppose racist language in politics. No flourish, no sermon, just a fact that settled like weight on the table. Older viewers at home could feel it land. Order, evidence, and consequence in one breath. Barron exhaled a laugh that wasn't laughter, eyes narrowing at the chart. He sneered, "Polls are a joke. The American people still stand with me." A low groan rolled through the press rows. The gavel cracked once, impatient. Jasmine uncapped her pen and wrote it all down. Claim, rebuttal, source, quote, timestamp. She underlined twice, then set the pen beside the folder like a loaded switch. She did not rush. She waited for the clean opening her record was building. Producers split the screen. The chart's stark bar beside Barron's shrug. In living rooms, especially among viewers over 50, the numbers felt like bedrock. No one needed a lecture. They needed proof, and Jasmine had placed it. He called it noise. She turned it into record, line after line. Her notebook closed with a soft click, and the cameras inhaled the quiet. The next move was hers. He had supplied it. The silence after Barron's last outburst was broken by the echo of the chamber doors swinging open. Heads turned. Cameras flashed. A clerk's voice rang out. "Professor Cornel West, appearing under congressional summons." The murmurs stopped instantly. Everyone knew the name. The philosopher, author, and one of the fiercest defenders of civil rights in modern America. He walked slowly toward the witness table, coat swaying with each step, his face carved with calm authority. Even Barron's posture stiffened, his smirk dissolved. Cornel West placed a stack of notes on the desk, adjusted his glasses, and looked straight at the committee. His deep voice rolled through the room like a slow, steady drumbeat. "I have come here today," he said, "to remind this nation that hate speech is not new. It's just dressed in new suits." He paused, letting the words breathe. In 1961, freedom riders were beaten on American soil for challenging segregation. In 1965, John Lewis was struck down on the Edmund Pettus Bridge for daring to cross it in the name of democracy. And in 1984, Shirley Chisholm, the first black woman to run for president, was told by her peers that she was too loud, too colored, and too ambitious. The room went silent again, this time out of shame. West's tone hardened. The language used back then was the same language we just heard in this chamber today. When a man says, "Go back to Africa," he is not joking. He is resurrecting the ghost of every mob that ever told a black child they did not belong. He turned directly toward Barron, eyes steady as stone. "You, young man, have repeated the very vocabulary of oppression. You've taken words soaked in blood and tried to make them fashionable again. But words like that carry history, and history does not forget." He leaned forward, voice quiet but scorching. "The true builders of this country were not dynasties with gold names. They were the ones who had no names. The enslaved, the laborers, the dreamers, the ones who worked the land and died for freedoms they never lived to see." The weight of his words pressed into every microphone. To speak against that is not freedom, he said. It is betrayal of democracy itself. Jasmine's eyes locked on West, her expression unreadable but fierce. Every sentence was entered into the official record, every quote destined for the evening news. Cornel West gathered his papers, straightened his back, and delivered his closing line directly to Barron Trump. You didn't just insult a woman, you insulted a history built from pain, courage, and sacrifice. And that, sir, is unforgivable. Silence crashed down again. Reporters scribbled furiously. The gavel struck once, sharp and final. Professor West's testimony became part of the official evidence, the blade that cut through all pretense. Barron Trump wasn't just exposed, he was cornered by history itself. The chamber was still humming from Cornel West's final line when Jasmine reached for the remote. She stepped to the lectern, lifted her chin, and with a single click, the wall-sized screen behind the dais came alive. The video timeline slid to a marked point. Audio meters glowed green. Then the clip rolled, Barron's own face in close-up, his voice clear and sharp. Go back to Africa. The words echoed through the marble room, captured by every mic, replayed in merciless clarity. No one could pretend they hadn't heard it. No one could look away. The room detonated. Reporters surged to their feet, shutters clattering like hail on steel. Staffers scrambled, phones up, signal bars spiking as live feeds multiplied. The chairman's gavel pounded for order, swallowed by a rising storm of gas and shouted whispers. On screens across America, the clip looped. Play, rewind, play, while comment counters spun into the thousands. Hashtags detonated on social media, a flash flood of outrage swallowing the news cycle in seconds. Jasmine did not flinch. She froze the frame with Barron's mouth mid-syllable. The closed captions burned across the bottom. Her voice cut through the uproar, measured and final. This is no longer speech. This is evidence. This is the verdict of history for Barron Trump. The line landed like a gavel strike no one could overrule. Heads turned in unison from the screen to Barron, as though the nation itself had pivoted to stare. Barron sagged back in his chair, color draining, the swagger gone. He fumbled toward the mic, words tripping over each other. Taken out of context, misunderstood, heat of the moment. But each phrase collapsed under the weight of the replay behind him. The clip answered him in real time, indifferent, exact, unforgiving. Aides in the back row stopped whispering and simply watched the waveform bounce, proof etched in pixels. He rubbed his forehead, shoulders caving, eyes flicking from camera lens to camera lens like a man searching for an exit that no longer existed. Jasmine lowered the remote and let the still frame linger, a silent witness larger than the room. The committee stenographer kept typing. Every keystroke sounded like another lock clicking shut. In newsrooms nationwide, producers built side-by-sides. His quote, the timeline, the law, the face. The gallery quieted not from calm, but from a collective, breathless recognition of what had just occurred. In that spotlight, Barron Trump didn't just lose the argument, he lost the public. And with the evidence blazing behind him, the third crescendo hit. Barron collapsed before the country, not with a scream, but with the unmistakable slump of a man judged by his own words. The explosion inside the chamber had barely settled when the real storm began outside. Within hours, congressional offices filled with noise. Pens scratching, staffers running, printers humming. By nightfall, dozens of lawmakers from both parties had signed a joint resolution calling for an ethics investigation into racist and discriminatory conduct unbecoming of public office. Reporters swarmed the hallways, shouting questions, cameras flaring like lightning. The signatures kept coming. Digital, handwritten, urgent. By morning, the resolution had enough support to hit the floor. The air in Washington felt like it was burning. Outside the Capitol, the fallout spread faster than any wildfire. Corporations that once courted the Trump name began to pull their funding. Energy firms, investment groups, luxury brands. One by one, they announced their withdrawal of partnership and review of political donations. Barron's name vanished from event sponsorships and corporate boards overnight. A leaked email from a major donor said what everyone already knew. Association equals endorsement. We can't afford that risk. The market responded instantly. His personal ventures lost millions in a single trading day. By noon, the headlines were brutal. The day Barron Trump's career collapsed. A dynasty cracks in public. Racial scandal erupts on Capitol Hill. Talk shows played the clip on repeat. Networks aired montages of his rise and fall, and one outlet called it the most self-inflicted implosion in modern American politics. Across the country, protests ignited. Spontaneous, furious, organized through a single phrase, "We belong." Streets in D.C., Chicago, Atlanta, and Los Angeles filled with thousands waving signs that read, "No more silence," and "Words have consequences." Inside the Trump family, the fracture was immediate. Donald raged behind closed doors, calling aides in a fury. "He's made us look weak," he shouted, according to an anonymous source. Ivanka kept silent, avoiding the press entirely. Her once dominant social media accounts turned dark. Melania disappeared from the public eye altogether. Her absence said more than any statement could. What had once been the image of unity now splintered under the glare of public outrage. Barron, isolated, surrounded only by lawyers and exhausted staff, became what one newspaper labeled the burden of his own bloodline. Meanwhile, America's conscience seemed awake. Civil rights leaders took to the airwaves. Former soldiers, teachers, doctors, and pastors of color appeared on television, recounting stories of discrimination and humiliation. A retired Navy officer said through tears, "I wore this country's uniform, but I was still told to go back where I came from." The clip went viral overnight, played side by side with Barron's infamous remark. Schools began organizing public discussions. Universities opened seminars on free speech and racial responsibility. One professor summed it up: "Freedom of speech is sacred, but so is the humanity it should protect." Internationally, the story dominated headlines. European and Asian outlets called it the moral Watergate. The BBC described it as a reckoning for the American soul. The Guardian ran an editorial titled, "From Power to Pariah, the Barron Trump Collapse." Even in countries far removed from U.S. politics, talk shows debated how one sentence could topple an empire. The footage of the hearing, Jasmine's face calm, Barron's voice caught in replay, became an image burned into global consciousness. Back home, Jasmine Crockett's name rose like a banner. Her speeches replayed across networks, classrooms, and protests. Late-night hosts quoted her line, "This is not speech, this is evidence." Magazines dubbed her the voice of a new America. An image of her standing beneath the Capitol lights, folder in hand, expression unflinching, became a viral symbol of courage and accountability. By the end of the week, the congressional seal stamped the investigation papers. The dynasty that once ruled the headlines now stood on the defensive. America had turned a single phrase into a national trial, and Jasmine Crockett into the emblem of justice for a generation that refused to look away. The storm had passed, but the air inside the Capitol still trembled. The cameras had stopped flashing, the audience had fallen into silence, and yet something electric lingered. That quiet after an earthquake, when everyone realizes the ground beneath them has changed. Jasmine Crockett stood at the witness table, the folder closed before her, the evidence entered into record, the nation waiting for her last words. Every camera turned, every journalist leaned in. The chairman's gavel hovered midair but never struck. Jasmine took one slow breath, straightened her posture, and looked not at Barron Trump, but at the entire chamber, at America itself. Her voice began low, steady, deliberate. "We've spent the last 12 hours asking who belongs to this country," she said, her tone vibrating with something deeper than anger: conviction. "But the truth is simple. No one has the right to decide who belongs here, because America belongs to all of us." Her words rippled outward like a shockwave. A few murmurs broke through the silence. Someone clapped once, then stopped. Jasmine's gaze swept the room. Senators, journalists, staffers, the public gallery, as if inviting every person to answer for themselves. "This nation was built by many hands," she continued, "some free, some enslaved, some forgotten. But their labor, their hope, and their faith laid the same foundation beneath all of us. That's the truth Barron Trump tried to erase, and that's why we cannot stay silent. The hall remained still, but the tension was alive, the kind that hums in the chest when a truth too long buried finally rises to the surface. Jasmine placed a hand on her folder, then spoke again, her tone rising. Words are not harmless. They build or they destroy. And freedom of speech, she said, her voice now sharper, comes with the responsibility to protect, not to poison. The line cut through the air like lightning. Barron sat motionless, staring at the table. His face was pale, his jaw locked. Behind him, aides exchanged frantic whispers, but no one interrupted. Jasmine pressed on, every phrase landing with precision. Freedom is not a license to wound others. It is a duty to defend the dignity that makes us human. You can shout freedom all you want, but when your words strip freedom from someone else, they cease to be free. A rustle spread through the crowd. Lawmakers nodding, reporters scribbling, a cameraman wiping his lens with shaking hands. For the first time all day, the chamber felt unified. Jasmine's calm was unbreakable, her rhythm surgical. She wasn't just speaking, she was etching a verdict into history. Then she softened. Her tone shifted from judgment to reflection, from fury to clarity. History, she said quietly, is not just the past. It is the mirror through which the present is judged. The sentence echoed. It wasn't a statement. It was a confession of a nation. We study the past not to escape it, she added, but to see how far we've fallen short of its promise. She lifted her eyes, and for a fleeting second, the room looked at her not as a congresswoman, but as a witness, one standing in for every voice ever silenced. You can tear down a law, you can mock a dream, you can even try to rewrite a story, she said, but you cannot unwrite truth. It always finds its way back, through the people who refuse to forget. From the upper gallery, a young intern clapped once, a small, hesitant sound, and then more joined. Within seconds, the applause built into something unstoppable. The sound swelled and rolled through the hall like thunder. The chairman didn't try to stop it this time. He simply let it happen. Cameras caught every angle. Jasmine standing under the harsh white lights, her expression calm, composed, unshaken, while chaos and history met in the same frame. The broadcast carried her words across America. Televisions, tablets, subway screens, smartphones. Every pixel glowing with the same message. No one decides who belongs in America. By evening, the entire country had seen it. The clip hit YouTube within an hour, titled simply, Jasmine Crockett's Final Words, The Verdict of History. The thumbnail froze on her face mid-sentence, eyes blazing beneath the Capitol seal. In less than 24 hours, it crossed 40 million views. Comment sections flooded like a river breaking its dam. Finally, someone said it. She didn't yell. She didn't curse. She just dismantled hate. This is the America I want back. The comments stacked faster than moderators could approve them. Across TikTok, Instagram, and late-night television, the moment became legend. Memes, remixes, reaction videos, news panels dissecting every word. But none of them changed what mattered most, the speech itself. In coffee shops, teachers replayed the clip for their students. Veterans groups quoted her line, "Freedom comes with responsibility." Churches played it after sermons. College campuses held open forums titled The Verdict of History. Even comedians on talk shows stopped joking when they mentioned her name. Back in Washington, reporters described the scene as a moral turning point. The New York Times ran a headline, "Crockett restores the meaning of justice." The Washington Post called her the conscience Congress forgot it had. For once, the networks weren't divided. From CNN to Fox, anchors replayed her final words without interruption. As the applause still echoed in memory, Jasmine stepped down from her seat. The gavel struck once, signaling adjournment. Cameras followed her every move. The folder under her arm, her heels clicking against the marble floor, the flash bulbs firing like gunfire. Outside, the Capitol steps were lined with photographers, journalists, and a swelling crowd held back by security barricades. The doors opened. She walked out into the cold evening air. The sun had just set, and the dome behind her glowed gold against the darkening sky. 1,000 camera flashes erupted at once, but she didn't blink. She paused at the top of the steps, lifted her chin slightly and faced the crowd. Questions flew through the air. Congresswoman Crockett, any comments? How do you feel about Barron Trump's collapse? Did you plan that final line? Jasmine didn't answer. She didn't need to. The world had already heard her answer. Behind her, the Capitol loomed like a monument reborn. Ahead, the night stretched open, filled with chants, applause, and the distant hum of helicopters circling above. For a moment, she stood there alone, framed in the glow of flashlights and history, her figure calm against the chaos. A reporter near the barricade whispered to another, almost reverently, "That's not a politician. That's a symbol." And indeed she was. By the time she reached the last step, the moment had already entered the bloodstream of American culture. Artists began sketching her silhouette. Newspapers printed her quote in bold. Professors cited the speech as a case study in rhetoric and moral authority. Even political rivals admitted off record that no amount of spin could erase what she had done. Jasmine walked toward the line of microphones but stopped short. She turned, facing the Capitol one last time. The wind lifted a strand of her hair. She whispered, not to the cameras but to herself, and perhaps to history. "Let the record show," she said softly, "that silence was never an option." Echten. Then she turned back, walked through the blinding lights, and disappeared into the crowd of aides and officers waiting by the black car at the curb. The doors closed behind her. The sound of cameras faded, replaced by the low hum of engines and the roar of voices chanting her name. That night, across television screens and social feeds, the clip of her final statement became the moral compass of a shaken nation. Tens of millions watched again and again, some crying, some silent, some simply staring. No one decides who belongs in America, because America belongs to all of us. It wasn't just a quote anymore. It became a pledge. By dawn, murals of Jasmine appeared on walls in Baltimore, Detroit, and Oakland. A graffiti artist in Brooklyn painted her profile beside the words, "Truth is patriotic." High school students turned her lines into posters for debate tournaments. Civil rights organizations printed them on banners for marches. In a country so often divided by politics, her voice became the rare bridge. A tone neither partisan nor performative, but purely human. People who disagreed on everything else found themselves nodding to her sentence. Freedom, after all, meant nothing without responsibility. When the next morning's papers hit the stands, they carried a single headline repeated across multiple outlets. "The verdict of history has been read." Beneath it was the same image, Jasmine Crockett standing before the cameras, eyes lifted, the weight of the nation on her shoulders, and the light of justice behind her. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.